On the evening of March 19, 1964, the Playboy Club at 5 East 59th Street hummed with its usual sophisticated energy, crystal glasses clinking beneath the glow of chandeliers as Manhattan's elite gathered in their tailored suits and cocktail dresses. The living room filled with cigarette smoke and jazz piano, while Playboy bunnies glided between tables serving man-sized old-fashions. To men who believed themselves masters of discretion, their exclusive keys dangling from silver chains, nobody suspected that among the laughter and business deals, a carefully constructed cover was about to unravel because of a spilled drink and a photographic memory. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. The transformation of Catherine Miller from small-town Ohio waitress to Manhattan Playboy bunny had taken exactly 3 months, but her journey into the heart of Cold War espionage would take only 3 seconds, the time it took for a martini glass to slip from her tray and shatter against the marble floor. What she saw in those 3 seconds would expose one of the most sophisticated Soviet intelligence operations in New York City and change the course of FBI counterintelligence forever. Catherine had arrived in New York in December 1963, drawn by the same dreams that pulled thousands of young women to the city each year. At 23 years old, with honey-colored hair and the kind of figure that made men turn their heads, she had worked at a diner in Columbus, Ohio, saving every tip and spare dollar for her chance at something bigger. The Playboy Club represented glamour and sophistication beyond anything she had known, a world where celebrities mingled with businessmen, where the drinks cost more than she used to make in a week. The audition process had been rigorous. Catherine stood in line with 47 other hopeful young women at the club's unmarked entrance, each one prettier than the last. The bunny mother, a stern woman named Mrs. Harriet Morrison, who had overseen bunny training since the club opened, evaluated them with the precision of a military inspector. Height, measurements, poise, and most importantly, the ability to maintain the Playboy mystique while enduring the demanding work. Catherine made it through the first cut, then the second. The training manual she received was 112 pages long, detailing everything from proper tail positioning to the exact angle at which bunny ears should rest on her head. She learned the bunny dip, a technique for serving drinks that prevented customers from looking down her costume, though many still tried. She memorized drink recipes, club procedures, and the cardinal rule that echoed through every training session: never under any circumstances fraternize with key holders. The costume itself was an engineering marvel and a daily torture device. The corset crushed her ribs, the 3-inch heels made her feet scream after the first hour, and the cottontail had to be fluffed and positioned perfectly every 15 minutes. But when Catherine first saw herself in full bunny regalia, she understood the appeal. She looked powerful, glamorous, untouchable. The costume transformed her from Catherine Miller of Columbus into Bunny Catherine of the most exclusive club in Manhattan. Her assigned station was the living room, the heart of the club where live jazz played and serious business happened beneath the veneer of leisure. The other bunnies warned her about certain customers, the ones who drank too much or let their hands wander, despite the strict no-touching policy. They taught her how to navigate the maze of male egos, how to smile while deflecting inappropriate comments, how to maximize tips while maintaining boundaries. The key holders themselves came from every tier of New York society. Investment bankers celebrated deals over scotch and cigars. Television executives discussed programming over vodka martinis. Foreign diplomats entertained business contacts in the quieter corners. The $25 annual membership fee created an illusion of exclusivity, though the club issued thousands of keys each year. Still, possessing that silver and black enameled rabbit head represented status, a passport to Manhattan's adult playground. Catherine quickly learned to read the room, to identify the big tippers and the troublemakers, to navigate the complex social dynamics that played out in hushed conversations and knowing glances. She developed her own system for remembering regular customers, their preferred drinks, their usual tables, their conversational topics. This attention to detail earned her excellent tips and praise from Mrs. Morrison, who valued precision above all else. Among the regulars, one man stood out for his consistency and reserve. He introduced himself as David Werner, a cultural attaché for a Swedish trade organization with offices in Midtown. He arrived every Tuesday and Friday evening around 7 o'clock, always alone, always impeccably dressed in European-cut suits that whispered money without shouting it. He ordered the same drink each time, vodka tonic with 2 lime wedges, no ice. He tipped exactly 20%, never more, never less. He read papers in various languages, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal. What struck Catherine most about Werner was his careful politeness. While other men leered or made suggestive comments disguised as jokes, Werner treated her with distant courtesy, like she was a professional providing a service rather than decoration in a revealing costume. He asked how her evening was going, remembered details from previous conversations, and never once let his eyes linger inappropriately. In the sea of entitled men who populated the club, his restraint was almost suspicious. Over the weeks, Catherine learned small details about Werner's life through brief exchanges. He had lived in New York for 3 years. He missed Swedish winters. He enjoyed modern art and attended gallery openings in Soho. He spoke 5 languages fluently. His work involved facilitating trade agreements between Swedish companies and American importers, particularly in manufacturing and industrial equipment. He had a dry sense of humor that occasionally surfaced in observations about other patrons. The night everything changed began like any other Friday evening in March. The club was packed with the usual crowd, the air thick with tobacco smoke and expensive cologne. Catherine worked her section with practiced efficiency, balancing trays of drinks, dodging wandering hands, smiling until her cheeks ached. Werner sat at his customary table near the piano, reading what appeared to be a Swedish newspaper while sipping his vodka tonic. Around 9:30, a new customer entered the living room, escorted by one of the door bunnies. He was younger than most keyholders, perhaps 35, with the nervous energy of someone unaccustomed to such establishments. His suit was nice but off the rack, his tie slightly loosened. He clutched his membership key like a lifeline as his eyes darted around the room, taking in the bunnies, the decor, the other patrons. A tourist in the land of sophistication. Mrs. Morrison assigned the newcomer to Catherine's section. She approached with her standard greeting, introducing herself and offering to bring him a drink. He ordered a dry martini, stammering slightly, his Midwestern accent marking him as another transplant to the city. Catherine brought his drink, set it on the cocktail napkin with the Playboy logo, and turned to check on her other tables. That was when she noticed Werner watching the newcomer with unusual intensity. Werner's expression remained neutral, but his posture had shifted, shoulders tense. Newspaper held at an angle that allowed him to observe the man without appearing to do so. Catherine felt a prickle of intuition, the same instinct that told her when a customer was about to cause trouble or when a bachelor party was about to get out of hand. The newcomer nursed his martini for 20 minutes, checking his watch repeatedly, glancing toward the entrance. He was waiting for someone. Catherine refilled water glasses and delivered drinks to other tables, but she kept the nervous man in her peripheral vision. Werner had apparently returned to his newspaper, but she noticed he had not turned a page in 10 minutes. At 10 o'clock precisely, another man entered the living room. This one was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He wore an expensive charcoal suit and carried a briefcase of buttery Italian leather. His eyes scanned the room with the calculated assessment of a predator evaluating territory, then locked onto the younger man. He crossed to the table without stopping at the host station, without waiting for escort. This was not his first visit. The 2 men greeted each other with the stiff formality of business associates rather than friends. Catherine approached to take the older man's drink order. He requested bourbon, neat, top shelf. His accent was subtle, but distinctly Eastern European, perhaps Russian or Ukrainian. Catherine had served enough diplomats and international businessmen to recognize the linguistic patterns. As she turned to fetch his drink, she saw Werner's reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bar. He was watching the 2 men with focused attention, his newspaper now completely forgotten. His right hand rested near his journal, fingers tapping a rhythm that seemed at odds with the jazz piano. Something was happening, something beyond the usual business meetings that occurred in the club every night. Catherine delivered the bourbon and retreated to a corner position that allowed her to observe her entire section. The two men at the table spoke in low voices, heads bent close together. The younger man reached into his jacket pocket and extracted what looked like a folded document. The older man made a dismissive gesture, and the younger man returned the document to his pocket, face flushed with what might have been embarrassment or anger. Their conversation continued for another 15 minutes, the younger man growing increasingly agitated, the older man maintaining icy composure. Catherine recognized the dynamic. She had seen it before in arguments between fathers and sons, bosses and employees, anyone in a position of power, and someone desperate to please them. The younger man was trying to prove something, to deliver something, and the older man was not satisfied. Werner called Catherine over and ordered another vodka tonic, his first deviation from his usual single-drink routine. His accent, normally barely noticeable, had thickened slightly. Swedish, she reminded herself, though something about the way he pronounced certain vowels had always seemed slightly off to her untrained ear. She brought his drink and continued her rounds. The confrontation at the businessman's table escalated, voices rising just enough to draw glances from neighboring patrons. Mrs. Morrison appeared at the living room entrance, her radar for potential disruptions finely tuned. Catherine intercepted her, quietly explaining that she had the situation monitored, that the men seemed to be concluding their discussion. Mrs. Morrison nodded curtly and withdrew, trusting Catherine's judgment. The older man stood abruptly, leaving his bourbon half-finished. He placed two $20 bills on the table, far more than the drinks cost, and strode toward the exit without another word to his companion. The younger man sat frozen, staring at the money, his face a mixture of shame and fury. After a long moment, he downed the rest of his martini in one gulp and raised his hand to signal Catherine. She approached the table, expecting him to request another drink or his check. Instead, he looked up at her with eyes that seemed on the verge of tears and asked if he could order one more martini, extra dry this time. Catherine nodded and headed to the bar, but as she turned, her heel caught on an uneven seam in the carpet, a small imperfection she had navigated successfully dozens of times before. But tonight, tired from a long shift and distracted by the strange tension in the room, she stumbled. The tray tilted. The martini glass she had been carrying for another customer slid in what felt like slow motion toward the edge. Catherine tried to correct, overcorrected, and the glass tumbled through the air, its contents spraying in an arc before the crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sound that momentarily silenced the piano. Every head in the living room turned. Catherine felt her face burn with embarrassment as she immediately crouched to collect the broken glass, apologizing profusely. Another bunny rushed over with a towel and dustpan. Mrs. Morrison would be furious. Broken glassware was a serious offense. Each piece had to be accounted for and replaced. But as Catherine gathered the shards, her eyes at floor level, she saw something that made her freeze. Werner's table was directly in her line of sight, and from her crouched position she had a perfect view beneath it. Werner's left hand, hidden from everyone else in the room, held a small camera no bigger than a cigarette lighter. His fingers were rapidly advancing the film mechanism, capturing image after image of the distressed younger man at the nearby table. The camera disappeared into Werner's palm the instant he sensed her gaze. But Catherine had seen it, seen the deliberate way he positioned it, seen the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Her mind raced. Why would a Swedish trade representative need to secretly photograph a random customer? The explanation that formed made her blood run cold. This was not about trade agreements or cultural exchanges. This was surveillance, this was espionage. Catherine finished collecting the glass, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She carried the debris to the bar and deposited it in the proper container, then prepared the martini for the younger man at the table, her movements automatic while her brain worked through implications. Werner was a spy. The realization seemed absurd in the sophisticated surroundings of the Playboy Club, but it made a terrible kind of sense. His regular schedule, his vantage point that allowed observation of most of the living room, his facility with languages, the way he read foreign newspapers and took notes, the leather journal that probably contained more than innocent observations about art galleries. He was using the club as a surveillance post, watching for targets, gathering intelligence, photographing people without their knowledge, and she had just caught him in the act. Catherine delivered the martini to the younger man, who barely acknowledged her. Werner had returned to his newspaper, the very picture of relaxed sophistication, as if the camera had never existed. Catherine moved to a table on the opposite side of the room, creating distance while she decided what to do. Should she tell Mrs. Morrison? Call the police? Confront Werner directly? Each option carried risks she was not qualified to evaluate. The younger man finished his second martini quickly and departed, leaving the money from the older man untouched on the table. Catherine cleared the glasses and the bills, her mind still spinning. When she returned from the bar, Werner was signaling for his check. She brought it to him, and as she set it on the table, he spoke in his usual polite tone. "Thank you, Catherine," he said. "I hope you were not hurt when you fell." His concern seemed genuine, his expression showing nothing but mild friendliness. But Catherine noticed his eyes, how they assessed her, calculated whether she had seen anything she should not have. She smiled and assured him she was fine, just clumsy at the end of a long shift. Werner added his standard 20% tip to the bill, wished her a pleasant evening, and left with his usual unhurried gait. Catherine's shift ended at midnight. She changed out of her costume in the bunny dressing room, wincing as she removed the tight corset and the shoes that had left her feet blistered and aching. The other bunnies chatted about their evenings, complained about difficult customers, shared gossip about who was dating whom. Catherine contributed minimal responses, her mind elsewhere. Walking home to her small apartment in the East Village, Catherine replayed every interaction she had ever had with Werner. Details she had dismissed now took on new significance. The way he sometimes arrived at the club minutes after certain other regulars, people she now remembered as diplomats or government officials. The notes in his journal that he never showed anyone. The occasional phone calls he took at the club's payphone, speaking in languages she did not recognize. The time he had asked her casual questions about the club's most frequent visitors, which she had answered without thinking, not realizing she might be providing intelligence. By the time Catherine reached her apartment building, she had made her decision. She could not go to the police without proof, and she definitely could not confront Werner without potentially putting herself in danger. But New York City in 1964 was a hotbed of Cold War espionage. Everyone knew the FBI maintained offices throughout the city and investigated suspected spies. If Werner was indeed a Soviet agent, as his behavior suggested, then the FBI needed to know. The next morning, Catherine called the FBI's New York field office from a payphone, unwilling to make the call from her apartment. She explained to the agent who answered that she had information about possible espionage at the Manhattan Playboy Club. The agent, clearly skeptical that anything valuable could come from a bunny at what he probably considered a glorified nightclub, asked her to come in for an interview. The FBI field office occupied several floors of an unremarkable building in Lower Manhattan. Catherine arrived wearing her most conservative dress, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She wanted to be taken seriously, not dismissed as a silly girl with an overactive imagination. The agent who interviewed her, Special Agent Thomas Brennan, was in his 40s with the weary expression of someone who had heard every conspiracy theory and crackpot accusation imaginable. Catherine laid out everything methodically. Werner's regular attendance at the club, his observation of other patrons, the foreign newspapers and mysterious journal. Most importantly, the camera she had witnessed him using to photograph the distressed younger man. She described the encounter between the two businessmen, the older man's Eastern European accent, the document that had been nearly exchanged. Brennan took notes without much visible interest until Catherine mentioned the camera. That detail made him lean forward, ask her to describe it again, confirm what she had seen. Small cameras were a signature tool of Soviet intelligence, he explained. The KGB had developed sophisticated miniature photography equipment specifically for covert operations. If Werner possessed such a device, it suggested professional training and support from a state intelligence service. Brennan asked Catherine dozens of questions. Could she describe Werner's appearance in detail? Did he have any distinguishing marks or mannerisms? Had she ever heard him speak on the telephone, and if so, what languages? Did he interact with other patrons? And if so, whom? Did he ever leave the club with anyone? Had she noticed any patterns in his behavior that might indicate pre-arranged meetings? Catherine answered as thoroughly as she could, surprised by how much she had unconsciously observed during her month serving Werner. The FBI agent's demeanor shifted from skepticism to serious attention. He made several phone calls from his desk, speaking in low tones while Catherine waited. When he returned his focus to her, his expression had changed to something approaching respect. "Miss Miller," he said, "I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is classified information. You cannot discuss it with anyone. Not your roommates, not your family, not the other bunnies at the club. Do you understand?" Catherine nodded, her heart pounding. Brennan continued. "The man you know as David Werner has been on our radar for approximately 18 months. We suspected he might be involved in intelligence gathering, but we had no concrete evidence. Your observation of the camera provides that evidence. We need your help to build a case against him." Catherine felt simultaneously vindicated and terrified. She had been right, but being right meant she was now involved in something dangerous beyond her experience. Brennan seemed to sense her fear and spoke reassuringly. The FBI would protect her identity. She would continue working at the club as normal, behaving exactly as she always had toward Werner. But she would now be the FBI's eyes and ears, noting everything Werner did, everyone he met, every suspicious behavior. Over the next 2 months, Catherine became an unwitting spy herself, observing the observer. The FBI provided her with a contact protocol, a specific payphone she would call at designated times to report new information. They taught her rudimentary surveillance awareness, how to detect if someone was following her, how to vary her route home, how to recognize signs that her apartment had been searched. Catherine learned that Werner was not Swedish at all. His real name was Dmitry Volkov, a major in the Soviet GRU military intelligence. He had entered the United States 3 years earlier, using expertly forged Swedish credentials, building a cover identity as a trade representative, while actually running intelligence operations throughout New York. The Playboy Club was one of several locations he used to observe targets, identify potential assets, and photograph documents during dead-drop exchanges. The younger man Catherine had seen in distress was Robert Kellerman, a clerk at the Department of Defense with access to classified shipping schedules for military equipment. The older man was Kellerman's handler, another Soviet operative the FBI had been tracking. The meeting at the Playboy Club had been a confrontation because Kellerman wanted out of the espionage relationship, but his handlers were pressuring him to continue providing information. Brennan explained that the FBI now faced a delicate decision. They could arrest Werner immediately based on Catherine's testimony about the camera, but that would only net them one mid-level operative. If they continued surveillance, they might uncover his entire network, identify other spies, and dismantle a significant portion of Soviet intelligence operations in New York. Catherine's continued observations were crucial to building that larger case. Catherine's life became surreal. By night, she served drinks in a bunny costume, smiling at Werner like nothing had changed. By day, she met with FBI handlers in safe houses, recounting every detail of Werner's behavior. She learned to notice things she had never paid attention to before, the way Werner's eyes tracked certain individuals, the specific tables he requested, the times he excused himself to make phone calls. The FBI placed additional surveillance on Werner, agents watching the club from across the street, a wiretap on his apartment phone, investigators tracking his movements throughout the city. Catherine's inside perspective proved invaluable. She could provide context the external surveillance could not, explaining which patrons Werner seemed most interested in, which conversations he positioned himself to overhear. In May 1964, Werner varied his routine for the first time Catherine had observed. He arrived at the club on a Wednesday, not his usual Tuesday or Friday. He sat at a different table, one with a poor view of the room but adjacent to a table occupied by 2 men, Catherine recognized as State Department officials. Werner ordered his usual vodka tonic and appeared to read his newspaper, but Catherine noticed he had positioned a small notebook on the bench seat beside him, partially concealed by his coat. The State Department officials spoke freely, assuming the club's noise and their low voices provided sufficient privacy. Catherine could not hear their conversation from across the room, but Werner was close enough. She watched him make subtle marks in his notebook without ever looking down, his eyes on the newspaper while his hand transcribed whatever he overheard. The technique was impressively practiced. Catherine reported this to her FBI contact during her next check-in. Brennan was pleased this was additional evidence of espionage activity. The FBI had also identified several other people Werner had photographed or observed, including a nuclear physicist from Columbia University, an aide to a United Nations ambassador, and a journalist who covered defense policy. The scope of his intelligence gathering was becoming clear. The decision to arrest Werner came in June, triggered not by Catherine's observations, but by international events. The FBI learned through signals intelligence that Werner had been ordered to return to Moscow for reassignment. If they did not act quickly, he would slip away, taking whatever intelligence he had gathered and leaving his network intact. The time for surveillance had ended. The time for action had arrived. On June 23, 1964, FBI agents arrested Dmitry Volkov as he exited his apartment building in the morning. They found the miniature camera Catherine had witnessed, along with specialized film, encryption materials, and coded messages. His apartment contained enough evidence to convict him multiple times over. The arrest made newspapers across the country, though Catherine's role remained classified. The public story credited FBI surveillance and investigation with no mention of the Playboy bunny, whose accidental stumble and sharp eyes had started it all. Werner's arrest led to a cascade of additional operations. Robert Kellerman, the distressed young man from the Defense Department, agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency. His testimony exposed 3 other government employees who had been pressured into providing information to Soviet handlers. The older man who had met with Kellerman at the club was identified as Yuri Volkov, Dmitry's cousin and fellow GRU officer, who fled the country before he could be arrested. The Playboy Club found itself at the center of unwanted attention. FBI agents interviewed staff and reviewed membership records, trying to identify how many other intelligence operatives might have used the club as cover. Mrs. Morrison was furious at the disruption and the negative publicity. Management worried that members would cancel their keys, that the club's reputation for discretion would be damaged by association with espionage. Catherine became a minor celebrity within the FBI, though her identity remained protected from public disclosure. Brennan told her that her observations had contributed to one of the most significant counterintelligence successes of the year. The case against Werner was airtight, and his network had been thoroughly compromised. Catherine had served her country without ever intending to, simply by being observant and brave enough to report what she saw. But the experience changed Catherine fundamentally. She could no longer see the Playboy Club as she had before, as a glamorous escape from ordinary life. Now she understood it as a crossroads of power and secrets, where information flowed as freely as alcohol, where everyone watched everyone else, where nothing was quite as it appeared. Every customer became a potential spy. Every private conversation could be intelligence gathering. The sophisticated veneer had cracked, revealing something darker and more complex beneath. In August, Catherine gave her notice to Mrs. Morrison. She explained that she had decided to pursue other opportunities, which was true enough. The FBI had offered her a position as a civilian analyst, evaluating intelligence from social settings where an attractive young woman might gather information more easily than a federal agent. Catherine declined the offer. She had stumbled into espionage accidentally and had no desire to make it a career. Instead, Catherine enrolled at Hunter College, using the money she had saved from her bunny tips to pay tuition. She studied journalism, drawn to the idea of uncovering truth and exposing hidden realities, skills she had discovered she possessed. She graduated in 1968 and built a successful career as an investigative reporter, though she never wrote about her time at the Playboy Club or her role in exposing Dmitry Volkov. The FBI's classification of her involvement remained in effect for decades. Werner himself, or rather Volkov, was tried and convicted of espionage in federal court. The trial received extensive media coverage, with testimony from FBI agents and government officials, but no mention of the Playboy bunny who had first noticed his surveillance activities. Volkov was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, but served only 3 before being exchanged for a captured CIA officer in one of the Cold War's many spy swaps. He returned to Moscow and reportedly continued working for Soviet intelligence in a training capacity, teaching new operatives the techniques he had employed in America. The Playboy Club continued operations until 1986, when changing social attitudes and the rise of feminism made the bunny concept seem increasingly outdated. The building on East 59th Street was eventually sold and converted to other uses, the glamorous past fading into Manhattan's endless cycle of reinvention. But for those who knew the full story, it remained a reminder that Cold War espionage happened not just in back alleys and embassy basements, but in the most unlikely places, amid jazz music and cocktails and the rustle of cottontails. Catherine Miller's accidental exposure of a Soviet spy illustrated a fundamental truth about intelligence work. Sometimes the most important observations come from the most unexpected sources. Trained agents and sophisticated surveillance equipment played crucial roles in Cold War espionage, but so did ordinary people who noticed something wrong and had the courage to report it. A waitress in a bunny costume proved as effective as any spy in uncovering a carefully constructed cover, not through training or technology, but through simple awareness and integrity. The broader implications of the Werner case extended beyond a single arrest. The FBI's investigation revealed how thoroughly Soviet intelligence had penetrated American social institutions, using places like the Playboy Club not for the pleasures they offered, but for the access they provided. The case led to enhanced security protocols at establishments frequented by government officials and defense contractors. It demonstrated that espionage was not confined to diplomatic functions and military installations, but occurred wherever people with access to secrets gathered in settings that seemed innocent. For Catherine, the experience reinforced lessons that shaped her approach to journalism and to life. She learned that appearances deceive, that the man reading a newspaper might be gathering intelligence, that a glamorous environment could conceal dangerous realities. She learned to trust her instincts, to pay attention to details that others overlooked, to question explanations that seemed too convenient. Most importantly, she learned that ordinary people have agency in extraordinary situations, that one person's observations and actions can have consequences far beyond their immediate circumstances. The story of how a Playboy bunny exposed a Soviet spy became a legend within FBI circles, though always told without naming Catherine. It was used in training sessions as an example of how human intelligence, HUMINT in agency parlance, often comes from civilians who happen to be in the right place at the right time with the right combination of observation and courage. The case study emphasized the importance of cultivating sources across all levels of society, of taking seriously reports that might initially seem unlikely, of recognizing that anyone might stumble across information valuable to national security. The Cold War context made the Werner case particularly significant. In 1964, tensions between the United States and Soviet Union remained high, only 2 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Both superpowers maintained extensive intelligence operations on each other's territory, each trying to gain advantages through information about military capabilities, diplomatic intentions, and technological developments. Every piece of intelligence mattered. Every spy caught was a victory. Every network disrupted was a blow to the adversary. Soviet intelligence operations in the United States during this period were extensive and sophisticated. The KGB and GRU maintained networks of officers operating under diplomatic cover, illegal agents living under false identities, and American citizens recruited or coerced into providing information. New York City, as the home of the United Nations and numerous media, financial, and cultural institutions, was a prime target for intelligence gathering. The city's international character made it easier for foreign operatives to blend in. Its concentration of influential people made it a rich source of information. The Playboy Club's role as an espionage venue was not unique. Throughout the Cold War, intelligence services used nightclubs, restaurants, hotels, and other social venues as locations for meetings, dead drops, and surveillance. These settings offered cover for contact between operatives and sources, provided opportunities to observe targets in relaxed moments when they might be less guarded, and allowed for seemingly casual encounters that were actually carefully orchestrated intelligence operations. The FBI and other counterintelligence agencies knew this and maintained their own surveillance of these locations, creating a complex dance of watchers watching watchers. Catherine's observation skills, honed through months of reading customer moods and anticipating needs as a bunny, proved surprisingly applicable to counterintelligence work. The same attention to detail that told her when a customer wanted another drink before he asked allowed her to notice inconsistencies in Werner's behavior. The same social awareness that helped her navigate complex interpersonal dynamics among patrons helped her recognize when interactions seemed scripted or unnatural. Her civilian perspective, free from the assumptions and tunnel vision that sometimes affected professional intelligence officers, allowed her to see patterns that might have been invisible to someone too close to the work. The ethical dimensions of Catherine's situation were complex. She had been thrust into a position where her actions could affect national security, yet she had no training, no authority, and no clear guidance about how to proceed. Her decision to report her observations to the FBI was brave, but also carried risks she could not fully assess. If Werner had discovered her role in exposing him, she could have been in serious danger. If the FBI had mishandled her information or her protection, she could have been compromised. She made consequential decisions based on limited information and had to trust that the authorities she contacted would act responsibly. The gender dynamics of the situation added another layer of complexity. Catherine worked in an environment where her primary value was supposed to be her appearance, where she wore a costume designed to be attractive to male customers, where she was expected to be charming and accommodating, but never substantive or authoritative. Yet she possessed information and insights that proved crucial to national security. The FBI agents she worked with had to overcome their initial dismissiveness about information from a Playboy bunny and recognize that intelligence can come from anyone, regardless of their occupation or appearance. The secrecy surrounding Catherine's role reflected the FBI's standard practice of protecting confidential sources, but it also meant that she received no public recognition for her contribution. While this protected her from potential retaliation by Soviet intelligence or its sympathizers, it also meant that her act of civic courage went largely unacknowledged. She could not share her experience with friends or family, could not list it on job applications, could not use it to build credibility in her later career. The satisfaction of knowing she had done the right thing had to be sufficient reward. The Werner case also illustrated the challenges of counterintelligence work. Despite months of FBI surveillance before Catherine's involvement, investigators had struggled to develop concrete evidence against Werner. His tradecraft was excellent, his cover was solid, and his activities were carefully calibrated to avoid obvious illegality. Without Catherine's eyewitness observation of the camera, proving that Werner was engaged in espionage rather than legitimate business activities would have been extremely difficult. The case demonstrated how a single piece of evidence, a single corroborating witness, could transform an investigation from frustrating suspicion to prosecutable certainty. The international ramifications of Werner's arrest extended beyond the immediate case. Soviet intelligence agencies had to assume that anything Werner had reported or any network he had established was now known to American counterintelligence. They had to pull back other operatives who might have been compromised, abandon safe houses Werner knew about, change communication protocols he had used. The disruption rippled through Soviet intelligence operations in New York and beyond, forcing reorganization and creating uncertainty about how much American authorities actually knew. The publicity surrounding Werner's trial, while carefully managed to avoid revealing sources and methods, served American propaganda purposes during the Cold War. It demonstrated that the United States was vigilant against Soviet espionage, that Soviet spies would be caught and prosecuted, that American security services were effective. The trial reinforced public awareness of the ongoing intelligence struggle between the superpowers and justified continued funding for counterintelligence operations. Every convicted spy became a symbol in the larger ideological battle between capitalism and communism. For the other Playboy bunnies who worked with Catherine, The revelation that one of their regular customers had been a Soviet spy was shocking and unsettling. Many of them had served Werner drinks, made small talk with him, perhaps shared innocent details about their lives or opinions about other customers. Knowing that these interactions might have been intelligence gathering rather than genuine conversation made them question their judgment and feel violated. The club implemented new security awareness training, teaching bunnies to be alert for suspicious behavior and to report anything unusual to management. The Playboy Club's management faced difficult decisions about how to handle the situation. On one hand, they wanted to cooperate with law enforcement and demonstrate that the club took security seriously. On the other hand, they were concerned about the impact on their business if the club became known as a venue for espionage. They ultimately took a middle path, cooperating quietly with investigators while publicly downplaying the significance of Werner's activities. Their official statement emphasized that one individual's criminal actions did not reflect on the club or its members, and that enhanced security procedures would prevent similar incidents. The case had unexpected effects on Catherine's relationships with other club employees. Some bunnies were impressed by her role in catching a spy and viewed her as a hero. Others resented the FBI attention and disruption she had brought to the workplace. Some suspected correctly that she had been working with investigators for months without telling anyone, which felt like a betrayal of the camaraderie among the bunnies. Catherine found herself increasingly isolated, which contributed to her decision to leave and pursue a different path. The skills Catherine developed during her months as an unwitting intelligence asset proved valuable in her journalism career. Her ability to observe carefully, remember details, recognize patterns, and assess whether people were being truthful served her well as an investigative reporter. She broke several significant stories during her career, exposing corruption in city government, uncovering safety violations at industrial facilities, and revealing financial improprieties at non-profit organizations. Her colleagues often marveled at her ability to notice inconsistencies that others missed, though they did not know the origin of these skills. Catherine remained in contact with Agent Brennan for several years after the Werner case concluded. He occasionally consulted with her about other investigations where her insights might be relevant, though she never again became directly involved in counterintelligence work. Brennan told her that the Werner case remained one of the most satisfying of his career because it demonstrated that vigilant citizens were America's first line of defense against espionage. He credited Catherine with exemplifying the civic responsibility that made democratic societies stronger than authoritarian ones. The miniature camera that Catherine had glimpsed beneath Werner's table became a piece of evidence in the FBI's collection of espionage artifacts. It was a Soviet-made Minox, a device that had been used by intelligence services worldwide, due to its small size and high-quality optics. The camera could photograph documents or people discreetly, and the film could be developed to reveal remarkable detail. The fact that Werner had been willing to use it in a public setting like the Playboy Club demonstrated both his confidence in his cover and the importance of whatever he was photographing. The psychology of espionage fascinated Catherine as she reflected on her experience. Werner had lived a double life for years, maintaining his cover identity while secretly serving Soviet intelligence. Every interaction was calculated, every relationship instrumental. The loneliness of such existence seemed crushing to Catherine, never being able to be fully honest with anyone, always watching for surveillance, constantly aware that discovery meant prison or worse. She wondered if Werner ever regretted his choices, if the ideology or patriotism that motivated him seemed worth the personal cost. The Robert Kellerman aspect of the case provided a cautionary tale about how ordinary people became entangled in espionage. Kellerman had not set out to become a spy. He had been gradually recruited through a combination of ideological manipulation and blackmail. Soviet handlers had exploited his financial difficulties and personal vulnerabilities, offering money and friendship before revealing their true purposes and making it difficult for him to extricate himself. His visible distress during the meeting at the Playboy Club reflected the moral and psychological torment of someone trapped in a situation they had never intended to create. The Cold War context that made the Werner case significant eventually passed into history. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, ending the ideological struggle that had defined international relations for nearly half a century. Many intelligence operations from that era were declassified, revealing the full scope of espionage activities on both sides. Catherine's role in the Werner case was finally acknowledged publicly in 1998, when the FBI released documents about Cold War counterintelligence successes. By then, she was in her late 50s, an established journalist with a reputation for integrity and thorough investigation. The recognition, when it came, felt anticlimactic to Catherine. The world had changed so much since that night in March 1964, when she stumbled and saw a camera beneath a table. The Playboy clubs were gone, the Soviet Union had dissolved, the Cold War that had seemed permanent had ended. The younger generation of journalists she worked with had no memory of that era and struggled to understand the significance of catching a single spy. But Catherine knew that in its time and context, what she had done mattered. She had contributed to defending her country in a time of genuine threat, and she had done so not through violence or grand gestures, but through simple alertness and civic duty. Looking back on her life, Catherine recognized the Werner incident as a pivot point that shaped everything that followed. Her decision to report what she saw, despite uncertainty and fear, established a pattern of moral courage that defined her career. Her experience working with the FBI taught her about institutional power and the importance of holding authorities accountable, lessons that informed her investigative journalism. Her time at the Playboy Club showed her the gap between appearance and reality, the way glamorous surfaces could conceal difficult truths, which became a recurring theme in the stories she pursued. The historical record of Cold War espionage is filled with dramatic tales of master spies and complex operations, of defections and double agents, of codes broken and secrets stolen. But it also contains quieter stories like Catherine's, of ordinary people who found themselves confronting extraordinary situations and chose to act rather than look away. These stories remind us that citizenship involves responsibility, that freedom requires vigilance, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is pay attention to what is happening around us and speak up when something seems wrong. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories, and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time.